Samson, wanna go for a car ride?
Let's go.
Yeah, car ride. If you're looking to break out on YouTube, I'm probably not the person to consult with. However, I have gotten a fair amount of views on YouTube and also some compliments on my production quality, which is something I definitely try to achieve with each video. But I haven't really spent much money at all on camera and production equipment. So today I'm going to take a break from reviews, and Samson and I are going to share what equipment I use and some of the techniques as well to maximize production quality on a budget. Before we talk about the camera, I want to talk about the things that I think are honestly more important than just the camera hardware itself. And that would be stabilization, audio, angles, and lenses. So first off, when it comes to a tripod, if you're an amateur and you don't have a giant camera that's super expensive, you can cheap out on a tripod. I used a $30 tripod, honestly, until just last year, and I really didn't even need to upgrade. But I would highly recommend using a tripod if you want to increase your production. A lot of people now will, just walk with a camera, and if that's, your style, you do you. Again, I want to reiterate, different situations and goals call for different shots. All of my insert shots or B-roll are moving. There are many instances where you want movement. This is where we get to use my favorite tool. The thing that I think a lot of people skip out on is a actual gimbal. A lot of people will just try to get away with using in-camera stabilization, warp stabilizer in post, or lens stabilization, which can be sufficient in a pinch, but many times these just don't do enough. So a gimbal is going to allow you to, especially for insert shots and B-roll, to have that cinematic look. And I went through film school where a lot of people can be very pretentious and they're just like, oh no, just give me a really nice camera. And so they have these awesome cameras, but their stabilization was terrible. In dramatic scenes, you don't want a gimbal, but for most of my YouTube videos and most other people's YouTube videos, they're not constantly looking for that dramatic effect. And it's honestly just distracting, in my opinion, when your video is shaky. A gimbal, especially like the one I have, which is the Ronin S, it's not going to eliminate all of the shakes. Mine was about $500 though, and man, it makes shooting with a proper lens so much easier. Of course, you can spend more and get the two-hand models that work better, but mine is perfect for long shoots as it's lightweight and easy to maneuver. But once you get to the point where you have a camera cage and external SSDs mounted, you'll need to upgrade. At $500, this is something that I've used for 3 years, and once you know how to use it, it really elevates your videos more so than spending an extra $500 on a camera would do. The next form of stabilization, and this is something that takes a little bit of extra time, and that's the main cost here, but is worth it if you're going for that cinematic look, is a slider. I bought mine for about $120 or $130 off of Amazon a couple years ago. I don't use it for every video because sometimes, honestly, I'm just cold or I'm in a rush and I just do not feel like taking the extra time to set up the slider because you need 2 tripods. I would recommend getting some beefier tripods as well. And the ones I bought were like $130 each. So that's when you start spending more serious money. What this is going to allow for is a slow and steady motion that really adds a premium touch to your B-roll. It's not necessary, especially if you have a gimbal for most of your YouTube videos, but if you're trying to do like video work for companies, that has been something where it's kind of wowed more people, I feel like. Now here's a bonus stabilization method that I rarely hear anyone talk about, and that's a longboard or a skateboard. Yeah, it sounds silly, but for the past 4 years, this is the most consistent thing I've done, is use a longboard to get these like rolling shots alongside cars. Now I have a very specific use for mine. A lot of people obviously aren't shooting videos of cars, but if you're doing anything that's moving, maybe you're just a couple shots that are moving, if you know how to skateboard or longboard, you can get some really cool tracking shots off of a longboard, and it's going to be very smooth if you have a gimbal. But yeah, I use it like an infinitely cheaper dolly. And again, this isn't necessary. Really, the most necessary things would be a $30 tripod and a $500 gimbal. Next up, audio. This is something that people like to neglect, especially when they're first starting out making videos. If you're talking a lot, you want good audio because poor quality video is less distracting than bad audio. It's really much more annoying. It's something that you don't want to get wrong, and it's something that is very easy to get wrong. I'll give you two options. One's much cheaper. Just a basic Sony recorder and lavalier microphone from Sony as well. The recorder is usually around $60 to $75. You can pick them up at Best Buy. The microphone in question, it uses a 3.5 millimeter jack, and it was like $25. This setup works okay, especially if you're in a more quiet environment. But a lot of you aren't going to be shooting in the most quiet environment. There's going to be wind, there's city noises and whatnot. So that option is less than $100. However, if you're looking for much better audio, I would go with the Zoom H4N recorder. It's going to have XLR inputs, so that's these big beefy boys. It's pretty easy to use. That's another thing that amateurs, you definitely want to pick up easy to use equipment. This is easy to use. And I have an ECM 44B microphone. The Zoom is 275 or 300, and then the ECM 44B, that was around 150. But that was such a big improvement for me personally, because it eliminated like 95% of the wind noise issues that I was having with my videos. My audio levels stopped peaking as much. It was just so much more consistent, and consistency is a huge issue, especially if you're shooting by yourself. Here's both of them next to the fan. Here's the Sony. Currently, I also have a video playing in the background. I have a refrigerator that's kind of noisy. So these are things that will, you're going to run into a lot of background noise pretty much anywhere that you shoot, unless you have an actual studio. Now, if you're doing voiceover and recording, I really just have experience with one microphone, and it's been awesome for me. You can use the H4N if you want, but I also have a Blu YETI, and that is been just a workhorse for me. What I would be using for the voiceover here in this video. All right, so now angles and lenses. Really want to vary those angles just so you kind of get a better grasp for how the vehicle actually looks. But this can be applied to many other things, especially for B-roll. You can really play around with stuff here, and that also equates to lenses. So when you get a camera, and you don't necessarily need to buy a camera, you can use your smartphone, but I'll explain that later. If you're using a camera, and this is again for videographers, not photographers, and you're not shooting a wedding or something where you don't have control over the subjects as much, I would highly recommend a prime lens. All a prime lens is one that doesn't zoom. It's gonna be sharper, and for less money, you get a better look. I have a 22 millimeter wide lens. It's the one I'm using right now. It's what I use for most of my interior shots of cars. You get a better look at everything, but it's not so wide to where things look distorted. But since I have a crop sensor, it's what you're going to get with these cheaper cameras. That means that it's actually functioning like a 30 millimeter or something around that. And while you could use this lens for everything, again, variation. You want some more telephoto shots, which are just a little more zoomed in. I would highly recommend this 32 millimeter lens I have that has a lower aperture even. And so a lower aperture is just going to give you more of that bokeh effect, the depth of field that can really make subjects pop, even with these, cheaper cameras. Lower apertures also allow more light in for better low light performance. Semi-affordable zoom lenses typically give you their lowest aperture in their widest position only. So I'd avoid using the lens that comes with the camera or the kit lens, which is usually a zoom, unless obviously you can't afford it, as you can work around it. Really, with any of these cheaper camera setups, getting better lighting and focusing on where your shadows are will make your shots much better. I got my 32 millimeter for $330 and my 22 for $150, but the prices have gone up since then. Now, to use these lower apertures, you're probably going to want an ND filter, which allows you to keep a great depth of field and reduce reflections while maintaining the proper shutter speed. It makes all of the difference, and my variable ND filter was only $30. So prime lenses, get an ND filter. Next thing, let's talk the cameras. I went with the most consistent option available, and it was somewhat cheap at $600. I used to just use my phone. An iPhone has typically much better video quality than an Android. I have a Galaxy Note 20, and that can supplement in shots pretty well when I need to. So, definitely make sure your phone takes good video too. But interchangeable batteries, lenses, and storage, along with sensor size, will be a pro to most DSLRs. I chose the Canon M50, which you can find for about $650 new right now. The M50 is stellar with autofocus. This camera doesn't overheat. I had issues when I was filming with my phone of overheating as well, and that's an issue that some older like Sony cameras have had, and it has a stellar face detection system too, so I can really rely on it when I'm shooting by myself, which is something that a lot of people are going to be doing. And that's really what I wanted, was something that I can rely on, and that was the M50 for me. And at $600, it's a pretty reasonable price too. They just came out with a Mark II that improves on a couple things like the autofocus, but it's still a 1080p 60 frame camera or a 4K at 24 frames. But the 4K at 24 drops the autofocus down to a different kind that's not as consistent, and it crops in, and I think it takes off some of the stabilization even more. So really, I never use the 4K here. I really want to get a Sony a7S III, but that's $3.5 grand, $4 grand. This is $600. If I trip on my longboard or the camera falls, you need insurance with those cameras that are super expensive. And next, I'm gonna stick with this concept of variation. The GoPro, it's so awesome to have the supplementary shots. I do it in all of my car reviews. It looks so much better than jump cuts. That's really why I use so many insert and B-roll shots in my videos, is because I don't want there to be a ton of jump cuts. I bought my GoPro Hero 5 Black in 2017 for like $300, I think. I just now got gifted by my amazing girlfriend a GoPro Hero 10. And that definitely did improve on the stabilization, and the shots do have a little bit better dynamic range, but the Hero 10 actually overheats if I put it in 4K, even in the car at a reasonable temperature and not too much sun. If you just let it run for too long, it does. 1080p, it's fine. But the Hero 5 Black, I could shoot in 4K and 1080, and it really wouldn't overheat. The dynamic range was just not as good. And if you're wondering what dynamic range is, see how my face is properly exposed, but my neck is completely white? That's dynamic range. If I had a more expensive camera, this here, you would be able to see my neck. And it's why, typically I want to try to avoid driving directly into the sun, but I don't want to end up 2 towns over, so we're driving back now. Some of this stuff won't be necessary for you. There isn't one superior style of video. This is just what is most practical and the best looking for me, since I have limited time to shoot and little help. Price breakdown. As far as the actual recording and production equipment goes, a modern phone can be capable enough in the right lighting to get started. Most phones also have built-in stabilization, so there really isn't a need for a gimbal. A phone tripod, Sony recorder, and mic will cost you $124. Throw in a GoPro like me when I started and you're up to $474. This is a workable setup, but if you want a more traditionally professional look, you'll want the M50, a polarizer or ND filter, and the Ronin S. Now it's $1,708, or about $1,350 if you don't need the GoPro. To take you to the next level, you would want the 32mm lens, that's $2,187. If you realize you can't get by with the kit lens for wide shots, the 22mm will take you to $2,437. Now if you jump straight to this level, you would save some cash, but if not, add $400 as a crispy audio tax for the zoom and Sony mic. If a lapel mic doesn't fit your production, a shotgun mic would be a similar cost and can be XLR or 3.5mm, which could bypass the need for the zoom. I'm leaving out the slider because for most, that would be a later step. Final cost? $28.37 for all production equipment, and again, the GoPro and the 22mm lens might not be necessary. This means that we're under $3 grand to give you production quality that would be good enough for 1 million subscribers. Over time, you will want to upgrade, but learning how to make the most of a practical yet cheap camera will help you better utilize the $4,000 camera in the future. 18-year-old me would have cried at $2,800, but I bought all of this stuff over time. Plus, all of these things hold their value, so it's not like you're just burning money. Now I'm just going to kind of go on a tangent and start to ramble, but I do want to drop a few really helpful things I've learned over the years. Be supportive and be there for your fellow creators. In all reality, there are far fewer people out there who who are going to be willing to put in the effort and make the sacrifices to become a content creator. So there's room for everyone who really wants to succeed to do so. I wouldn't spend too much time worrying about what other people are saying in the comments section. I really used to have such a bigger issue than I do currently, where everything that they said, I would take it personally. Most of the time, the people that are in the comments that are, talking down to you or really just being rude, they probably don't have anything better to do, and their life is probably way more sad than yours. So really, just make the best content that you can and have fun with it. Because in the end, if you're putting in the time to do this, you're probably pretty passionate about it. So focus on that. So that wraps up the 4th episode of Pitbull Pit Stop. I do one every year just to step away from my regular content. If you like car reviews or you just want to check out the next episode of Pitbull Pit Stop in a year, feel free to hit the subscribe button and push the bell for notifications. Samson and I personally thank you for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.